Dear friends, in this video lecture, we are going to delve deeply into relative deprivation theory in education. NET education we are going to speak. That is in English. The entire thing is in English. Let us straight away enter into the topic. I am Dr.I.JESU DOSS SJ, a former associate professor and a research supervisor from St.Xavier College of Education, Palayamkotti. It is my pleasure after retirement. I wish to give so many educational videos for different types of students. Now at the moment I am preparing NET education, NET paper 1. So continue to watch me and support me so that I am able to give more and more videos for you. Thank you very much for your presence. Let us straight away enter into the topic. Relative deprivation theory of social movements. That is in the first unit of NET education, education studies. Now in that particular unit it is coming, one of the subheadings. What do you mean by deprivation? See, you want to, you wish to have certain things, but due to certain conditions you are unable to get that. You are deprived of certain privileges. That means you are rejected in certain areas. Certain benefits in the society are rejected for you. So that is called deprivation. So there is a relative deprivation theory in social movements, in sociology. We are just talking about it. Relative deprivation theory is a sociological idea that explains why people, even in stable and prosperous societies, may feel unhappy or push for social change. It helps explain how social movements and collective actions form by focusing on the gap between people's expectations and their actual conditions. Relative deprivation means feeling deprived of something a person or group believes they deserve. That is what I said in the beginning. No? So some people believe that certain benefits they should be getting, but they are deprived, they are not given due to certain conditions. That is called relative deprivation. So relative deprivation means feeling deprived of something a person or group believes they deserve. This feeling is a relative because it comes from comparing oneself to others in similar situations or to one's past experiences rather than from a complete lack of resources or opportunities. Resources are there, opportunities are there. Due to the past experiences, people compare themselves to other groups. So that is why this feeling is a relative. That's why now in India we are having forward class, forward caste, backward caste, SC, ST, caste, different caste, names are there. So naturally this becomes a relative because certain people think that the privileges have not been given adequately to them. So when they feel like that, then it becomes a relative. Opportunities are there, resources are there, only thing this particular group is not getting anything. That is the idea of relative, the word relative. So this feeling is a relative because it comes from comparing oneself to others in similar situations or to one's past experiences rather than from a complete lack of resources or opportunities. The theory suggests that when people feel unfairly disadvantaged compared to others, they become frustrated and discontented, leading to protest and organized efforts to address their concerns. So when it is not given, they organize themselves, they protest against that, they believe that certain benefits are their own and it is not given to them, somebody is controlling them, something like then they indulge in protest and they make organized efforts to address their concerns, problems. What are the origins of relative deprivation theory? This idea of relative deprivation comes from the work of sociologist Robert K. Merton and later scholars like Samuel Stuffer and Ted Robert Gore. So these are all important people with regard to relative deprivation theory in sociology. The theory was developed to explain why individuals or groups that are not the poorest or most oppressed still feel unhappy and call for social change. Robert K. Merton in the 1930s, Merton studied how people often judge their well-being by comparing themselves to others. Even people in good situations might feel deprived if they see others doing better. Samuel A. Stuber. During World War II, Stuber expanded on Merton's work by studying soldiers' morale. He found that soldiers in well-performing units were less satisfied than those in less successful units because of the comparisons they made to their peers, even though their conditions were better. So all these studies have been made by such scholars, Samuel Stuber or Robert Merton, etc. Another scholar is Ted Robert Gould. In his book Why Men Rebel, Gould developed a framework to understand relative deprivation. He argued that the gap between people's expectations and their actual conditions leads to frustration, which can turn into collective actions including rebellion and social movements. What are the key concepts of relative deprivation? First one is perception of inequality. Very important concept here is that perception of inequality. See, the sources are there, opportunities are there, resources are there, but it is unequally distributed. That is the perception, and because of that people rebel. That's the idea here. Perception of inequality. The theory emphasizes that it is not the absolute level of deprivation that matters, but how people perceive they are worse off compared to others. People often compare their situations with others in similar social groups. Then rising expectations. As societies develop, people's expectations rise. If real improvements don't match these expectations, individuals or groups may feel deprived even if their objective conditions have improved. This is called a concept of rising expectations. Society improves, at the same time people expect also. They have a lot of expectations from the society. If they don't match together, then there is a problem and the people feel discouraged, they feel deprived, and then they begin to rebel against government or anything. Rising expectations. Then frustration aggression hypothesis. Gould's theory, that is it is his concept, frustration aggression hypothesis. Gould's theory is linked to the frustration aggression hypothesis, which suggests that frustration caused by the gap between expectations and reality leads to aggression. In social movements, this can lead to collective actions to fix perceived injustices. Then social comparisons. Relative deprivation often comes from social comparisons. When people compare themselves with others and see a large gap between what they have and what others have, the feeling of deprivation grows. Social comparison. What are the types of relative deprivation? Relative deprivation can be broken into several types based on the comparisons people make. Individual relative deprivation. There is a concept called individual relative deprivation. This happens when a person compares his own situation to others and feels deprived, not given. For example, a worker who feels underpaid compared to colleagues may feel individually deprived. Same work, same hours, but his companions are getting more and this fellow is getting less. Then there is a frustration. Then he feels discouraged. He feels deprived. That is the idea here. That is called individual relative deprivation. Then there is group relative deprivation. This is when an entire group feels deprived, such as ethnic minority or the working class. This is what happens. This is when an entire group feels deprived, such as ethnic minority or the working class. Group relative deprivation often leads to social movements as people unite over shared grievances. Then there is a concept called temporal relative deprivation. This occurs when people compare the current situation to their past or future expectations. If they feel their situation has gotten worse over time, even if they are still better off than others, they may feel deprived. This is called temporal because of the time it happens. So again I repeat, the temporal relative deprivation occurs when people compare the current situation to their past or future expectations. If they feel the situation has gotten worse over time, even if they are still better off than others, they may feel deprived. How to apply relative deprivation theory to social movements? Relative deprivation theory helps explain how social movements and collective actions form. People do not always push for change because of absolute poverty or oppression, but because they feel unfairly deprived compared to others or what they think they deserve. So people do not always push for change because of absolute poverty or oppression. Because they feel unfairly deprived compared to other groups, or they deserve more and it is not given to them. When they feel they deserve more and then it is not given to them, then they push for change. They need a change, in the societal structure. Key elements that explain how relative deprivation leads to social movements. They include perceived injustice. Perceived injustice. People take action when they feel treated unfairly, unjustly, often through social comparisons. For example, during the civil rights movement in the States, US, African Americans fought for equality because they saw themselves as entitled to the same rights as white Americans. Of course, this is history, we know that. Perceived injustice. Then political opportunity. People's sense of deprivation is often accompanied by the feeling that change is possible. This might happen when political opportunities arise, like changes in laws or shifts in power. So political opportunity. Then there is an opportunity in politics, then the people rebel at that time. Then mobilization of resources. Relative deprivation alone is not enough to create a social movement. Individuals and groups must mobilize resources like money, leadership, and organizations to succeed. That is called mobilization of resources. Then identity and solidarity. Social movements often depend on creating a shared identity, common identity among individuals who experience similar forms of deprivation, and that causes a social movement. This sense of solidarity strengthens the movement and makes it more effective. What are the examples of social movements driven by relative deprivation? The civil rights movement. In the 1950s and 1960s, African Americans fought for equality in the United States. They were legally free but faced discrimination and inequality, which led to widespread protests for reform. The Arab Spring, another one, beginning in 2010, many people in the Middle East and North Africa were frustrated by economic and political conditions compared to Western nations. This sense of relative deprivation combined with the political corruption led to massive protests. Then labor movements. Workers throughout history have compared their poor working conditions to the wealth of business owners, which led to strikes, protests, and the formation of labor unions, especially during the Industrial Revolution. Now, let us analyze what are the criticisms of relative deprivation theory. Although influential, relative deprivation theory has been criticized for the following reasons. Overemphasis on perception. Critics argue that the theory focuses too much on people's feelings of inequality, overlooking objective conditions like poverty or unemployment. Critics argue that this relative deprivation theory focuses too much on people's feelings of inequality, overlooking objective conditions like poverty or unemployment. The second reason is that Second criticism, inability to predict movements. Relative deprivation does not always lead to action. Many people feel deprived but don't join social movements. The theory can't explain why some instances of deprivation result in action while others do not. So we cannot predict. We are unable to predict movements. It happens spontaneously, when people join together for a particular cause. Then complexity of grievances. A mix of economic, political and cultural grievances often drives the social movements. Critics say relative deprivation theory simplifies the causes of these movements by focusing mainly on feelings of inequality. Very important one. There are so many complex phenomena involved here. Economic, political and cultural grievances. Relative deprivation theory simplifies the causes of these movements, without giving adequate credit to all these factors. Simply they focus only on the feelings of inequality. That is called complexity of grievances, and because of that, that is why it is criticized. They always talk about feelings of inequality. That is the idea here. Conclusion. Relative deprivation theory offers valuable insights into why people join social movements and take collective action. Highlighting the role of social comparisons and rising expectations helps explain why people may feel aggrieved even in prosperous societies. Though it has limitations, the theory remains a useful tool for understanding how feelings of injustice lead to social change. As societies continue to evolve, the theory will likely remain relevant in explaining social movements around the world. Now, let us analyze some of the important questions. What is the core idea behind relative deprivation theory? A. Absolute poverty causes social movements. B. People mobilize based on comparisons of their situations with others. C. Political repression alone leads to collective action. D. Wealth distribution causes discontent. So what is the correct answer? People mobilize based on comparisons of their situation with others. Relative deprivation focuses on the gap between people's expectations and their reality, which arises from comparing the situation to others, not just from absolute poverty or repression. Not because of that, they are simply comparing, and then they have the feelings of inequality. That is the idea here. Which one of the founding scholars of relative deprivation theory? A. Emil Durkheim. B. Robert K. Merton. C. Karl Marx. D. Max Weber. Now, Robert K. Merton, as we have already seen that, Merton was one of the first to discuss how individuals evaluate their well-being by comparing themselves to others. Which key concept is central to relative deprivation theory? Which key concept is central to relative deprivation theory? A. Economic inequality. B. Objective deprivation. C. Perception of inequality. D. Gender discrimination. That is a perception of inequality. The theory emphasizes how the perception of being worse off than others can lead to frustration and social movements regardless of the actual conditions. So, perception of inequality. According to relative deprivation theory, what is more important than absolute deprivation? A. Social mobility. B. Social comparisons. C. Economic stability. D. Technological progress. So always social comparisons. Relative deprivation theory talks about social comparison. Because of that, there is a feeling, ill feeling of or a feeling of inequality. Relative deprivation focuses on how people compare themselves to others and feel deprived if they see others doing better. What is the frustration aggression hypothesis related to? A. Gender-based violence. B. Economic inequality. C. The gap between expectations and reality. D. Absolute deprivation. What is frustration aggression hypothesis related to? That is the gap between expectations and reality. According to this hypothesis, frustration arises when expectations do not match reality, potentially leading to aggression or collective actions like social movement. So, frustration arises according to this frustration aggression hypothesis theory. Frustration arises when expectations do not match reality, potentially leading to aggression or collective action or social movement. What is the basic premise of relative deprivation theory? A. People join social movements because they are absolutely poor. B. People join social movements because they feel deprived relative to others. C. People join social movements for personal gain. D. People join social movement due to government coercion, compulsion. So, what is the basic premise of relative deprivation theory? That is, people join social movements because they feel deprived relative to others. Relative deprivation theory holds that social movements arise when people feel deprived compared to others. According to relative deprivation theory, what triggers the social movements? A. Absolute poverty. B. Economic stability. C. Perceived inequality. D. Government propaganda. So, according to relative deprivation theory, what triggers social movements? That is perceived inequality. Social movements are triggered by perceived inequalities or deprivations relative to others. Relative deprivation theory is often used to explain which type of social movement. A. Revolutionary movements. B. Religious movements. C. Environmental movements. D. Cultural movements. So, relative deprivation theory is often used to explain revolutionary movements. Which type of social movement? Revolutionary movements. Relative deprivation theory talks about revolutionary movements. Revolutionary movements often arise from perceived social and economic inequalities. What psychological feeling is central to relative deprivation theory? A. Happiness. B. Contentment. C. Frustration. D. Indifference. Of course, we know that frustration. Relative deprivation theory leads to frustration. Frustration due to perceived deprivation is central to the theory. Now, which historical event can be analyzed through relative deprivation theory? Which historical event? A. The Industrial Revolution. B. The French Revolution. C. The Scientific Revolution. D. The Renaissance. Here, the French Revolution. Which historical event can be analyzed through relative deprivation theory? Of course, the French Revolution can be analyzed, with regard to this particular concept, deprivation theory. The French Revolution was driven by feelings of deprivation among the lower classes. That is what happened there, French Revolution. Now, what does relative deprivation theory say about social comparisons? A. They are irrelevant. B. They cause social contentment. C. They lead to feelings of deprivation. D. They promote social harmony. So, what is the correct answer? What does relative deprivation theory say about social comparisons? They lead to feelings of deprivation. Social comparisons often lead to feelings of deprivation and injustice. What is the common outcome of relative deprivation according to the theory? Common outcome. What is the consequence, in other words? A. Social harmony. B. Increased political stability. C. Social unrest. D. Economic prosperity. So, what is the common outcome of relative deprivation according to this theory? That is social unrest. Social unrest is a common outcome of a relative deprivation. Relative deprivation theory is linked to which broader sociological theory? A. Structural functionalism. B. Conflict theory. C. Symbolic interactionism. D. Rational choice theory. So, relative deprivation theory is linked to which broader sociological theory? That is conflict theory. Of course, later on we are going to study on that. There is a separate topic as such, but then in this question it comes. Okay, relative deprivation theory is linked to which broader sociological theory? That is conflict theory. It is closely linked to conflict theory, which focuses on social inequalities and power struggles. We are going to talk about it next in a few lectures. Relative deprivation theory explains that people are motivated to join social movements. Relative deprivation theory explains that people are motivated to join social movements when they have achieved their goals, when they feel content with their situation, when they feel an experience or when they experience a gap between expectations and reality, when they are forced to obey authorities. So what is the correct answer? Relative deprivation theory explains that people are motivated to join social movements when they experience a gap between expectations and reality. A gap between what people expect and what they experience can motivate them to join social movements. Which concept is essential in understanding relative deprivation theory? A. Social norms. B. Cultural rituals. C. Comparison groups. D. Absolute values. So that is comparison groups. Comparison groups are essential as they are the benchmark against which individuals measure their deprivation. Relative deprivation theory suggests that social movements can arise in A. Only poor society, B. Both rich and poor societies, only during economic crisis, only under dictatorial regimes. Relative deprivation theory suggests that social movement can arise in both rich and poor society. It is a feeling of inequality, nothing to do with the resources or plenty of money or etc. etc. So it is a feeling of insecurity and people rebel. No, that is the idea here. So, relative deprivation theory suggests that social movements can arise in both rich and poor societies. Social movements can arise in both rich and poor societies if people feel relatively deprived. Which of the following is not a factor in relative deprivation theory? A. Expectations. B. Social comparison. C. Absolute deprivation. D. Perceived inequality. So, absolute deprivation. Absolute deprivation. It is not a factor in relative deprivation theory. Simply people compare. No? That is the point here. The theory focuses on perceived, not absolute deprivation. Everything is there, but still people feel that they are deprived of certain privileges. That is the idea here. So this theory focuses on perceived, not absolute deprivation. What does the J-curve hypothesis suggest in the context of relative deprivation theory? A. Economic growth leads to contentment. B. Economic stability prevents the social movements. C. Rising expectations followed by a sharp decline lead to social movements. D. Absolute poverty is the main cause of social movements. What does the J-curve hypothesis suggest in the context of relative deprivation theory? Rising expectations followed by a sharp decline lead to social movements. The J-curve hypothesis suggests that rising expectations followed by a sharp decline lead to social movements. Which scenario best illustrates the relative deprivation? A person is unhappy despite earning a high salary because their peers earn more. That is a particular situation. A person is happy with their income even though it is below the poverty line. C. A person joins a social movement because they have no income. D. A person feels content because everyone around them is equally poor. So which is the right one? Which scenario best illustrates the relative deprivation? A person is unhappy despite earning a high salary because their peers, their colleagues earn more. So that is the ideal situation for this theory. Relative deprivation is about feeling deprived in comparison to others despite one's own absolute situation. Relative deprivation theory can be used to explain the origins of which social phenomena? A. Urbanization. B. Industrialization. C. Protest movements. D. Technological innovation. That is a protest movement. Relative deprivation theory can be used to explain the origins of which social phenomena, that is protest movement. Protest movement often arise from feelings of relative deprivation. What role does perception play in relative deprivation theory? A. Perception is irrelevant. Perception is the main factor. Actually, perception of inequality is the main factor here in this theory. That is the correct answer also. Perception is secondary to actual deprivation. Perception only matters in economic terms. Different options are given. Which is the right one? What role does perception play in relative deprivation theory? That is, perception of inequalities is the main factor. Perception of deprivation is the main factor driving this theory. Relative deprivation theory would suggest that social movements are less likely to occur when people feel equal to others, when people are absolutely deprived, when there is no economic growth, when people are unaware of their deprivation. People feel equal to others. Deprivation, this relative deprivation would suggest that social movements are less likely to occur when people feel equal to others. When they feel equal to others, no protest, no ill feeling. Only when they feel unequal, then there is a protest. That is the idea here. When people feel equal to others, they are less likely to experience relative deprivation. Which of the following best describes the concept of relative deprivation? A. Absolute lack of resources. B. Feeling deprived compared to one's past. C. Feeling deprived compared to others. D. Government imposed deprivation. So what is the question? Which of the following best describes the concept of relative deprivation? Feeling deprived compared to others. Relative deprivation is feeling deprived compared to others. According to relative deprivation theory, when is social unrest most likely to occur? A. During times of economic prosperity. B. During times of economic decline. C. When there is a gap between what people have and what they expect. D. When the government is stable. So according to relative deprivation theory, when is social unrest most likely to occur? When there is a gap between what people have and what they expect. They expect more and they have little, then there is a problem. When this gap widens, then social movements occur and there is a protest, there is a feeling of inequality, all these things. When there is a gap between what people have and what they expect. That is the idea here. So why social unrest? Because of this. When there is a gap between what people have and what they expect. Social unrest is most likely when there is a gap between people's realities and their expectations. Relative deprivation theory suggests that social movements are driven by objective measures of poverty, subjective feelings of injustice, government policies, media influence. So relative deprivation theory suggests that social movements are driven by subjective feelings of injustice. Subjective feelings of injustice drive social movements according to the theory. Which of the following is a criticism of relative deprivation theory? It overemphasizes economic factors. It ignores the role of expectations. It underestimates the role of absolute deprivation. It overlooks the role of government policies. Which is the criticism of relative deprivation theory? It underestimates the role of absolute deprivation. One criticism is that it underestimates the role of absolute deprivation. For an example, two people, one particular group compares with another group. Just because the second group gets more and more and perhaps they are having a better quality of life. Now the problem is that they are able to see only this particular type of inequality. Perhaps there are not more resources. That is also possible. That is called absolute deprivation. Actually, nobody can get anything. There are no. There are no enough resources. For an example, that is absolute deprivation. So that way, this theory underestimates the absolute deprivation. They are not worried about that, how much resources are available. Simply they are comparing with the other groups and then they get into, protest and other things. That is the criticism leveled against, leveled, here in this theory. What is the reference group in the context of relative deprivation theory? A group that sets the social norms. A group against which individuals compare themselves, a group that enforces laws, a group that provides financial aid. What is the answer? Reference group here, it is the group against which individuals compare with themselves. One particular group feels that they are deprived of certain benefits. They feel that another group gets more and more. They get a lot of privileges. So naturally, the reference group will be those people who are getting a lot of privileges. So the reference group is one against which individuals compare themselves. This particular group compares with another group because those people are having more and these people are having less. I think the reference group is those people who are having more. So based on that, then they get into the feelings of inequality. Now, relative deprivation theory is most concerned with which aspect of inequality? Income inequality, wealth inequality, perceived inequality, policy-driven inequality. That is perceived inequality. The theory is concerned with the perceived rather than actual inequality. Relative deprivation can be described as a feeling of absolute poverty, comparative disadvantage, political disinterest, intellectual superiority. So the relative deprivation can be described as a feeling of comparative disadvantage. The theory emphasizes how individuals perceive their status in relation to others, other groups. What term refers to the gap between what individuals expect and what they actually experience? Social cohesion, expectation reality gap, marginalization, status inconsistency. So, what term refers to the gap between what individuals expect and what they actually experience? Expectation reality gap. This gap fuels feelings of deprivation, which can spark social movements. Which of the following is not a factor in the development of relative deprivation? Social comparison, absolute poverty, rising expectations, perceived inequality. Absolute poverty, the answer is absolute poverty is not a factor in the development of relative deprivation. Relative deprivation is not about absolute poverty but about perceived inequalities in comparisons to others. Thank you very much, dear friends. God bless you abundantly. Let us meet in another video lecture. Kindly subscribe, that will give more value for the videos. And also likes, give your comments, all these things matter a lot to me, because I am just uploading in YouTube. When I do something, when I spend some time, why not I get the benefit also, no? I hope you understand me. So please, click the like button, subscribe button, but I'm not compelling you, but if you wish that I can be given some credit, please do so. Thank you very much for your presence. God bless you abundantly. Let us meet in other video lecture.